Braving the rain, over 80,000 people poured into Habima Square in central Tel Aviv to protest the government's proposed judicial reforms. The rally took place under a heavy police presence as National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir called for police to crack down on any unrest. The new government plans sweeping changes to the judiciary. A simple majority in the Knesset would be enough to annul the top court's rulings and give those in power more influence over the appointment of judges. Critics have gone as far as to call the planned reforms the death of democracy, while proponents argue the courts have gained excessive power and are issuing rulings that no longer represent the will of the people. How justified are the protesters' fears? Will there be a domino effect? Is Israeli democracy in danger?
So let's get to it. Is Israeli democracy really in danger? As always, we begin with our quickfire round, 30 seconds each to lay out your initial sense on the matter, and we'll pick up the conversation from there. So, Mr. Sher, please take the lead. Your 30 seconds are on.
Yes, I think we are talking about a dramatically different Israel because the democratic notion in the Jewish democratic Israel yielded under the current government to sticking only to the Jewishness of the state. And the struggle is now between liberal, progressive, and democratic citizens and the ones that are rightist, messianic, and nationalistic. So the civil society in Israel, I believe, feels that there is a rapid sellout of the democratic foundations of the country, that the 1948 Declaration of Independence, which served as a quasi-constitutional Bill of Rights, is being constantly marginalized and at stake.
Okay, we'll put us up right here and continue from that point exactly in a split second. Yehudah Glick, your thoughts?
Shalom, Ellie. Shalom to all the panel. When we see in the center of one of the biggest cities in Israel a demonstration of tens of thousands of people, it only proves that the Israeli democracy is stronger than ever. I don't see what kind of danger there is to the democracy. There were elections. There's an opposition. The opposition is doing their job. They're protesting. And the government is doing its democratic job. It got the rule, and it's going to rule, and it's going to bring the decision to the Knesset, and there will be discussions. And that's exactly what democracy is all about.
Dan Perry, last but not least.
These proposals would turn Israel's government into an elected dictatorship, and it would mutate the country into a sort of fake democracy, such as we see in Turkey and Hungary. By allowing the government, via its majority in parliament, to annul decisions of the Supreme Court, this removes the primary source in Israel of minority rights, of checks and balances, of basic protections for all citizens. And in a situation as brittle as Israel's is, with so many competing sectors in society, it's a recipe for strife, both internally and with the Palestinians.
And speaking of recipes, and please feel free to interact from this point onwards, dear panelists, the vehement refusal of the judiciary for so many years to be open for any change from the smallest to the biggest, is it merely an eat what you cooked sort of a situation here, Mr. Sher?
Not at all. I think that the reforms are quite willingly accepted, but not these kind of reforms, which I believe are the epicenter of which are the weakening of the Supreme Court, and the limitation on anything but whatever is politically easy or amicable to the government, to this government. So these are not reforms. These are a crashing on the judiciary altogether, including all the law enforcement bodies and the Attorney General, etc. So it's kind of an all-out offensive on the judicial system in order to weaken it.
But Ellie, I'd like to address that also, if I may.
Please.
Among the many lies vehiculated here to justify what could be called a coup d'etat is the idea that the Supreme Court in Israel has been extraordinarily activist in a way that makes governance impossible. Now, viewers should know, In the entire 75 years of Israel's existence, the Supreme Court interfered with legislation 22 times, which is very, very meager compared to other countries. And I would add, in my past as chairman of the Foreign Press Association in Israel, I was involved in several petitions to the Supreme Court attempting to ensure access and to overturn closed military zones that we consider to be spurious. And I have to say they almost never succeeded. The court, far from being some bastion of hyper-liberalism, was sometimes close to a rubber stamp for the government and took the word of the IDF and of the Shin Bet almost as gospel. That's how it appeared to us. The current situation is the result of politics and not philosophy about jurisprudence.
But speaking of politics, Yehudah Glick, this is, according to Benjamin Netanyahu, what the citizens voted for. What we're seeing is essentially, again, according to Netanyahu, is merely the elected representatives delivering on what they vowed to deliver.
Exactly. And not only that, the very fact that the two panelists here today, Gilad and Dani, are refusing to understand that this is what the people feel. The Likud came out in this election and said, this is on our highest agenda. 2 million people voted for this. So apparently, at least 2.5 million people in Israel don't feel what Don and Gilad feel, that the Israeli Supreme Court is not getting involved enough and is not getting involved. For some reason, in this country, at least for the past 30 years, the feeling for more people on the right and more in the religious field is that the Supreme Court took one side. And we heard it last week very clearly when the president of the Supreme Court came out and took a political side. So this is one of the proofs again and again that the Israeli Supreme Court, which we're all interested in being strong, but we don't want it one-sided. And therefore, we want to balance its power so that it should be a strong Supreme Court and so the people would really have trust in our strong Supreme Court, because that's all
Mr.
we
Glick,
want.
Again, you know, anything but facts. I never contested the democratic elections results in Israel. I'm only saying the following: that the epicenter of all this is initially Netanyahu's will to escape from his ongoing criminal trial for bribery and fraud and breach of trust. It got out of hand altogether. The menu has myriad dishes, which we talked about, curbing and changing the laws and even basic laws, and weakening the Supreme Court and sterilizing the law enforcement bodies, chasing civil societies, NGOs, etc., that are talking about human rights and the likes. And you know, the civil society has the right to rise against the subjugation of the country to the personal concerns of one person, and this is Prime Minister Netanyahu.
I would like to respond to Mr. Glick as well.
Anybody who knows Minister Yariv Levin, for at least 20 years, he's been talking about these reforms that need to be made way before any indictment against Netanyahu. And you know, the whole presenting this whole thing as delegitimization of this government in every single way, because everything is dangerous. Using, I would say, atomic bombs. 2 weeks ago, Minister of National Security went up to Temple Mount. They said, oh, there's going to be a third world war. Then Yariv Levin comes out with a plan he's talking about for the last 20 years. Immediately, democracy is at stake. Take your breath. Democracy is not at stake. The government is going and has a plan. And we want to implement this plan. And the plan is to strengthen the Supreme Court, to strengthen the judicial system, and make sure it's not one-sided. And at the same time, to do what our voters believed should be done. And
I have to dispute this.
It should be respected.
Repeating it doesn't make it true. Netanyahu himself, not many years ago, very eloquently, very forcefully said he would never allow a weakening of the Supreme Court.
And therefore he's not.
Hold on, let me finish, please. He could have been at the rally yesterday. He said an independent and strong Supreme Court is a central pillar of a democratic system, and that he would never allow its weakening. Moreover, you must have been in a different country than I was in September and October during the campaign. Likud had no platform. Yariv Levin certainly did, state that this is what he wanted, but Netanyahu himself didn't go there at all. He merely said that, yes, we want certain balancing reforms in the legal system. Now, look, I think I refer everyone to Occam's razor. The principle in philosophy that says that the explanation usually is the simplest one. We have here a confluence of three things. One, the settlers don't like the court because it is the primary thing standing in the way of thievery and total oppression of the Palestinians in the West Bank. The Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, don't like the court because it stands in the way on the basis of the principle of equality for their demands for special rights, like not serving in the army as a sector. And last but not least, the prime minister is a criminal defendant who wants to weaken the system that put him in power. Moreover, has appointed a cabinet with a few other criminal defendants and convicts. It's obvious.
By the way, in this respect, the Supreme Court is set to discuss the Aryeh Deri question of whether allowing him or not to become a minister this week. Some would suggest it might have an impact on that. But allow me to paraphrase here on Clausewitz. The judiciary, no matter from which standpoint you're looking at it, is the judiciary becoming, or already is, an extension of politics by other means? Was Esther Chayut's speech, fiery speech, a mistake, Mr. Sher?
It was perhaps not appropriate, but when you are bombarded by such heavy artillery, you respond, and this is her response.
But this response is somewhat preaching to the choir, claiming the judiciary is playing a political role, Dan Perry. And listening to Esther Chayut, many are saying, you know what, there you have it.
We have here a situation that you have in other places in the world as well, where the very idea of democracy, and to an extent, the very notion of truth, fact-based truth, has itself become a political position. And that's uncomfortable, and it leads to inappropriate and extraordinary things. And you could argue that the Chayut speech last week was one of those things. But the court has to stand for democracy. If the government is attacking democracy, then the court is indeed in conflict with the government in a way that arguably is political. That's life. Life is imperfect, and no system of governance is
democracy, the lesser
reform.
of all evils, as we all know the phrase. Yehudah Glick, 20 seconds left for the first part. Yep.
I want to say that I would compare it to something else. When the beginning of the feminist movement came out, everybody said, how can you do that? No, women have a job. Women should be in the kitchen, and that should be... Whenever there's a change, what we usually find is that those who you're trying to change tend to be conservative. And that's what happens again. What we are trying to do is to make changes, and it's reasonable that the Supreme Court would not want those changes.
Okay, gentlemen, hold your thoughts right there. We're taking a very short break, but when we get back, we unpack what can be done from this point onward. So do not go anywhere. A few minutes break, and now we're back with the second part of our summit. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Yehudah Glick, Gilead Sher, and Dan Perry. Thank you, gentlemen, so very much for staying with us. We're also staying on topic, and there are already some calls for a compromise, a dialogue. Some even suggest a national referendum. Let's take a listen to Israeli President Isaac Herzog this morning. Some say he's already deep in the mix of trying to move ahead. Let's take a listen.
I wish to take this opportunity to address the events of the hour. We are in the grips of a profound disagreement that is tearing our nation apart. This conflict worries me deeply, as it worries many across Israel and the diaspora. The office of the president is perhaps the only place today that enjoys the confidence of all parties and is capable of hosting discussions on the subject in a manner accepted by all, behind closed doors and in open doors. Over the past week, I've been working full-time, by every means, making non-stop efforts with the relevant parties, with the aim of creating a wide-reaching, attentive, and respectful discussion and dialogue, which I hope will yield results. I humbly admit that I am not certain of this endeavor's success. There is goodwill from the various parties with whom the responsibility lies, but there is still a long way to go and significant gaps remain.
Okay, let's get to it. Another quick fire round, 30 seconds each. Simply put, should the president get involved at all? Yehudah Glick.
First of all, I'm happy that the president would like to get involved, and I think it was very smart on his side, not taking a side. But I think that the right place to run this issue is in the Knesset. That's exactly what the parliament is for, is to raise a subject. There's a coalition and opposition, and to hear all the sides. That's where it should be done.
Dan Perry?
The simple answer is yes. When two sides aren't really talking, mediation always sounds like a good idea. And so, yeah, I support it, and the presidency is a respected institution. But I have to say that if Herzog really wanted to be useful, he should take a side. Because there is a side of democracy here and a side of authoritarianism. And when someone is trying to burn down your house, you need support more than a mediator to figure out which room to torch first.
Gilead Sher, is staying on the fence not good enough at this point in time?
I would like to see this government governing for the country and on behalf of its citizens, not sectorially. But this is not in the card of this current government. So yes, I'd say the president should get involved in this, and not only in the current the current crisis, but also in the upcoming ones.
And we will get to the political ramifications, perhaps immediate ramifications in a second. But, gentlemen, we all know this scene. It's a cold winter evening. You're rolled up on the couch with your fellow couch potato. And then you're like, Yehudah, can you please go and get me some persimmons and milk and whatever from the grocery store? And then Yehudah twitches at me, and then I'm like, you know what? Just fetch me a cup of tea from the kitchen. Point being, maybe it was all a negotiation tactic to set the bar so high, to talk about this extended reform of the judiciary when the goal, to begin with, was just a cup of tea.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with you. Netanyahu clearly wants to weaken the electoral system, and Netanyahu is the judicial system. Netanyahu is a master tactician, and I do think that he's allowed Yariv Levin to, come out on the stage with a nuclear weapon in order to potentially down the road lower the flames and agree to something else and present himself as a responsible adult. I would note this. Before the election, Netanyahu was boycotted by the center and the left, and they promised every day that there's no way they would ever support the prime minister or join him in a coalition. I strongly suspect that if the nuclear bomb is removed from the stage and Netanyahu agrees to rule in a reasonable, responsible fashion, they might reconsider, because the option of letting him rule with the extreme right and essentially burn down the house is too horrific.
So, Yehudah Glick, is this reform the way to expand the government to the center or the center-left?
I must say my tolerance is running out. The arrogance I hear from both Dan and Gilad about the lack of the Israeli government, the right-wing government, to rule. They need a babysitter. They need a Herzog. They need tactics. We don't really mean what we say. And Dan was telling me, actually, we don't want to change the Supreme Court, but actually the ultra-religious can't manage because they want to run the whole thing. The lack of trust that we, the right in Israel, and the ultra-Orthodox, we have a policy, and we believe in it. And we're trying to promote it, and that is why we went to elections. And we know what we're doing. We know what we're doing. It's not a tactic. Yariv Levin has been talking about this from the beginning. He's bringing it to the Knesset. He wants to deal with it. The same exact thing on every one of the topics. Itamar Ben-Gvir has a policy. He believes it's for the good of Israel, and he's bringing it to there. And the government, led by Netanyahu, who today has trust from all the segments of the government, nobody there lacking trust in him. And we, the Israeli government today, wants to run the country because that's exactly what the elections gave it. The
elections did not. The elections ended up.
No, it's not arrogance. It's they're illustrating.
I really have to reply. The elections were a tie in terms of the vote. The reason why there is a small majority, yes, they were. They were. The reason why the right has a small majority in the Knesset, the reason why they have 64 and not 60-60 is because of splits in the Arab Party and the left, so 6% of the vote was wasted. Now, this is good luck on the part of the right to use that good luck to rule in a manner.
No, it's not just good luck. It's heavy
and poor performance by the left. Yes, of course. But here's my point. What you are trying to do here is to reduce democracy to its most vulgar baseline of majority rule. And I have to say that is not so popular, including among Likud voters. The idea that 51% can decide to do anything is infantile. I think if you ask the people, should 51% be able to kill 49%? Most would agree that's not a democratic outcome. And essentially, that is what's on the table here. The idea that the majority should be unchecked.
Gilead Sher.
You know, there's a trend here to normalize the abnormal and to legitimize what has been up to not so long ago the delegitimized internal terrorism and messianism, etc. And Netanyahu's government is openly committed by all his statements to further weaken both the fundamental values and the established state institutions while systemically campaigning to cross the judiciary. So yes, there is a grand plan here. There's a grand strategy here. And whatever we've seen in the last couple of weeks is tactics and pure tactics only.
Yehudah Glick, is it fair to say that the government's first achievement is the revival of the counter camp, so fractured and divided until the great judicial reform was introduced?
In a way, I can say yes, because finally, after 3.5 years of an election campaign, there's finally a government, which the state of Israel lacked for so long. And yes, when there's a coalition and there's a government, there's an opposition. And it's very, very healthy for a democratic society to have a coalition and to have opposition. But the coalition and the opposition have to know their borders. And the opposition has to know that it's an opposition. It's not ruling the country. And the country is led now by the government. And the government will have to succeed in governing this country. And that's exactly what they were for. And I'm happy. I'm very happy. We have an opposition, because just like every single automobile has an accelerator and a brakes, we need an accelerator, we need a brakes. But if the brakes run the country, we don't go anywhere. If the accelerator runs the country, we go ahead, and the brakes is there to protect from falling into the deep.
Where are the brakes? Where are your brakes? There's no brakes here.
If there's an opposition, that's what democracy is all about.